If you wait for stories to find you, you're not going to make a lot of films. That's why it's so important for us as documentary filmmakers to develop an approach and a practice for finding stories. So in this video, I'm going to share 14 tricks to help you find your next documentary story idea. Hey everyone, I'm Austin Meyer. I'm a documentary filmmaker and National Geographic Explorer, and on this channel, I share the field-tested skills, mindsets, and lessons that have helped me on my journey as a documentary filmmaker. Finding stories can be hard work, and that's why I think a lot of filmmakers wait around for a story to hit them in the face. But if you cultivate a new relationship with finding stories, one of play, wonder, and discovery, it can really be one of the most enjoyable parts of the process. Now, there's no one way to go about finding a story, but here are 14 tricks that have worked for me. Trick number 1, talk to strangers. There is no better way to source stories than asking strangers good questions. Ask about their lives, their jobs, their kids. Ask about what are the breakthroughs in the field they work in, or who is the most fascinating person they know. Talking to strangers will often lead you outside of your immediate worldview. And that is a great place to find stories because when people and things around you are new, you don't take them for granted. Trick number 2, mind your community. Ask those same great questions to your friends and community. One question I like to ask my friends is, what do you wish more people knew about X? And X could be their hobby, their job. Essentially, I'm trying to get at what is the underreported or not talked about phenomenon in their world. Mining your community for stories also means getting out into your community. Take what I call a story finding walk. Literally walk out of your house with the explicit intention of finding a story. Make it a game where you see everything as a potential story. A story finding walk is how I once found a story in Palo Alto, California about a man whose job was to sit and watch the train tracks for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. So I'm kind of just walking around Palo Alto now, keeping an eye out for what captures my eye. What could be a story? Interesting people, interesting things. We'll see. I found a story. Usually I just drove right past this man, but on my story finding walk, I got curious and went up to talk with him. And I ended up making the story about him and his unique job, which only existed as a reaction to the amount of youth in Palo Alto who had been committing suicide by jumping in front of the trains. And this is not even an issue I was really aware about until I got curious and asked him. Trick number 3, show up where stories happen. Stories come from conflict, tension, and drama. So show up to places where conflict, tension, and drama happen. I've published multiple short films with National Geographic that were sourced from me showing up at hospitals when I lived in Zambia. I've also had multiple stories come from natural disaster zones. Go to places where the stakes are high and you will find compelling stories. Trick number 4, go where you have unique access. Do you happen to be friends with an Olympian or a major celebrity or just someone fascinating? Do you have unique access to a location? Documentaries are great at bringing people into a world they have never witnessed before. So let your access guide you. I published another film with National Geographic about a soccer program in the world's largest Syrian refugee camp. Now, I had unique access to film in the camp simply because I played college soccer and I have a lot of connections in the soccer world. And I just happen to know people running a soccer nonprofit in the refugee camp. So where does your unique access lead you? Trick number 5, find the only. The only is someone who is singular in what they do. The last person to do this, the first person to do this, the world's best, the world's oldest, youngest, the only person in the world to do something. Talk to people to find the onlys, or you can use strategic Google search terms or Google alerts to find them based on the terms I just mentioned. One of my most viewed short docs of all time came from finding the only in my area, which was about a printing press in San Francisco that makes books by hand using ancient techniques. Trick number 7, ask if this current event is happening, what else might be happening? That's the question I ask myself when news happens around me. When wildfires broke out in my hometown, I asked friends who else is being impacted that most people aren't thinking about or talking about. And that's when I learned about wine growers who were having to do emergency picks of their grapes on the edge of fire zones to save their crops. So keep an eye on news locally, nationally, internationally, and constantly ask yourself, how are the impacts of these stories reverberating out and affecting lives in my community? Trick number 7, ask if this current event is happening, what else will happen? So much news coverage is dedicated to the thing that just happened. Assume everybody else is going to cover that. Imagine second or even third order effects that seem unlikely now, but will relatively soon become normal and obvious. After those fires in my hometown died down and the media left, I did a story about how insurance companies are dropping Californians at staggering rates, causing people to move out of state. I also just got in my car and drove around town, which led me to a story about a man whose home was the only one in an entire area that did not burn down. Specifically, I saw his house, I drove up, wrote him a note about my interests in telling his story, and then I just left it on his front porch. And thankfully, he called me back. That ended up being my first story I've ever done for National Geographic. Trick number 8, make the call, write the email, send the DM. Do not ever assume that you're not big time enough to tell a particular story. You never know who will say yes to you. If you want to make the film about Coldplay's next concert tour, send them a DM. With social media, we all have the opportunity to get in contact with the people whose stories fascinate us the most. Make the call, write the email, send the DM. Don't reject your own potential access to a story. Trick number 9, scrape social media. With social, not only can you source ideas at scale, but you can also use search terms based on your interests to find leads. One strategy I've used is going into Facebook groups of local communities or particular interest groups and posting that I'm looking for story ideas. When I moved to Zambia in 2018, I posted in a Lusaka community group that I was looking for stories, and I heard back from hundreds of people. That led me to a Nat Geo story about the national handball team of Zambia, and also one for Al Jazeera about Zambia's first circus, which was empowering youth in one of Lusaka's most notorious townships. Trick number 10, look for limit cases. Let's say you find a piece of news out in the world that's vaguely interesting. Say something about a new kind of AI voice replication software. Okay, now imagine the most extreme permutations of who could use that technology. Evil geniuses creating fake news, someone on their deathbed wanting to preserve their voice. Or, in a story that I worked on for the Washington Post, ALS patients who can now record their voice before they lose it, so that when they do lose it, their automated voice sounds just like them. When you find something semi-interesting, just plug in the most unusual limit cases. And if you're lucky and find one scenario that is just much more intriguing than the others, you may get even luckier that such a person and such a story actually exists. Trick number 11, go to conferences. If you're interested in stories around a particular theme, conferences are a great way to meet people in that space and get a lot of story leads in one physical space. Bring a notebook, jot down people's info, and then follow up with an email about your skill set and what kind of stories you're interested in. Then whenever something fascinating happens in that person's space, they have your info to reach out to you. You'll be top of mind. Trick number 12, read scholarly articles. Many scholarly journals list their most cited, shared, and read articles online. A lot of the big ones do it, and you can find some gems on those lists. A lot of smaller journals do it too, so check out journals in fields that you know something about and fields you know nothing about. Trick number 13, sign up for newsletters. Newsletters are great for exposing yourself to as many stories as possible that don't make it to the front page of most newspapers. I have an email address purely for newsletters. And every once in a while, I'll block off a little time to pop on over to that inbox, skim the newsletters, and just see if anything sparks curiosity or an idea. I sign up for news roundups, weekly and monthly newsletters in my areas of interest. And then I also follow individual thinkers that I respect. Oh, and I also will throw in some wild cards in there, some newsletters about surprising factoids or random fields meant for a tight group of specialists. Like I subscribe to the International End-of-Life Doulas Association's newsletter. So you never know what you'll find. Trick number 14, what stirs your emotion? This is the big one for me. When I feel moved, when I get emotional, whether it's filled with joy or I'm crying, that's when I know there's a story idea lurking. Maybe the specific thing I'm getting emotional about isn't exactly the story, but maybe it points me in the direction of a theme that resonates with me. This is why I made a short doc called Golden Hour about regular folks finishing a 100-mile ultramarathon right before the time cutoff. Because I myself had teared up while spectating the final hour of a previous ultramarathon race. And I thought, well, if I'm crying, I know I'm gonna be emotionally invested in telling the story. And if I am emotionally invested, maybe others will be too. So those are my 14 tricks for finding story ideas, but I'm curious, what are yours? If there are any strategies you use for finding stories, please drop them in the comments below and we can start to crowdsource ideas. And if you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to the channel and I'll see you in the next one. Until then, go out and tell some stories.